Velemseni Mthiyane is at Nasrec to take a closer look at what impact the EFF has had in the country's political landscape since its formation. Mfundo, perhaps to start the conversation here, the EFF is no insignificant party. It certainly has, for better or for worse, impacted South Africa's body politic and the electoral political landscape. But as it reflects on its position and its way forward today, one can ask, is the party in a strong enough position to continue to stake its claim in South African politics? Perhaps you and your panel have some pontification around that.
We are in the program. So right now we understand that it's the presentation of the Treasurer General's report, again going to be a very comprehensive one, purely because this is an account of the last 5 years. So many people would take for granted that in this instance it can't just be something where perhaps it's 10 pages. So we even understand that the Secretary General's report, which is the organizational report, was in excess of 80,000 words. So most certainly it would have taken time. So we are very much behind insofar as the program is concerned. But right now I'm joined by our SABC specialist researchers Velemseni Mthiyane and Masuli Ralebone, just to give us a sense of the impact of the EFF in the past 11 years. Gentlemen, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us on the program.
Thank you.
No, it's a pleasure to have you with us. Let's start with just the impact. 11 years ago, 2013, starting with you, Velemseni. 2013, there's the emergence of this party. The EFF leader, outgoing, we must always emphasize, stated yesterday that the EFF, on its founding, it was founded at a time when you had just the Marikana massacre. And that was one important, significant moment for the EFF. They've had other significant moments as they continued. But let's just remind everyone of the founding and the impact that they've had in the political landscape.
Sure. We will recall that when the EFF was founded, most of those who supported it were usually characterized as those who are disgruntled, those who are not part of the system that seemed to be leaving the majority on the fringes, whereas others were benefiting in the economy. So if you look at the situation in Marikana, for instance, you will realize that those were workers who were demanding for what is called a living wage, because they were saying, yes, we are working, but what the wage that we are getting is not a wage that gives us a decency of life. So it means they needed a decent wage. So the issue that there is capital, the big business, the mining sector, at that time it was loan mean. They could not agree to give the workers. I still remember that time it was about 12,500. And if you look at it now, you start to look at the demand at that time, it appeared to be much. I remember other people would say, but this is too much for mine workers, because at that time they had thought that the demand was unreasonable. So now you realize that those who were disgruntled and they felt that the system was not offering them a platform where they will articulate and have their issues being attended to and attended to with agency. So then when EFF was formed, such kind of people were those kind of people who said, then you are going to be our voice. Then EFF rode on that wave and said, look, there are voices who are calling for an alternative, because the current ruling party perhaps may have gotten into cahoots with the capital and therefore leaving the majority of the poor on the fringes of the economy, where they became beggars in the country, where they benefit or where they were told they were going to benefit after the democracy. So you can then realize that the EFF comes with this kind of support. So going forward, 10 years, 11 years later, you can see that most people who have been coming in and the policies, 7 cardinal pillars of EFF, they mainly address these issues that are mainly resonating with those who feel that we are left behind, whereas we see that our economy is growing, and those who are post-democrats, the economy has grown, and the majority has not benefited out of that. So now the EFF, during that period, you realize that they became a voice for those who feel like they are left on the margins of the economy.
So now you have this support base, those on the periphery of this economy, Maswili, and then they go into their first elections. Let's remind our viewers of the outcome of those elections, because they did quite well, 6%.
Yes, you will remember that when the EFF was formed, 2013, challenging the ANC in 2014, the ANC was comfortably sitting at 62% plus of the South African votes. Then they go in and bring the ANC to 57 in the ANC got 62 in 2014, and then they go in again in 2019 to bring the ANC to 57. But let's not forget the impact also that they created in the local government elections. For the first time in 2016, after former President Jacob Zuma was going around talking about ANC will be in power until Jesus comes back. But in 2016, that's when people, I remember on social media, when the results were coming in, people saying, it looks like Jesus finally, Jesus for the ANC finally came back because of the results. For the first time, the ANC lost Tshwane, the ANC lost City of Johannesburg, the ANC lost Ekurhuleni. The ANC lost Nelson Mandela Bay.
And that was the time when the EFF said they're not entering into a coalition with the DA, but most certainly will be voting with the DA.
Because their negotiations with the ANC deadlocked, and they couldn't compromise on one of the issues that the ANC said the EFF was demanding, was the removal of former President Jacob Zuma. But the EFF came out and say, we want the 7 cardinal pillars, which means
removal of
exploration of land without compensation, removal of STEM is one of them, state capacity, building state capacity, nationalization of the Reserve Bank, and many others amongst issues that the EFF stand for.
And just to remind you, at the time, commentators said that it seems as though the EFF is negotiating in bad faith here, where they're looking to almost insert issues that are of a national or should be decided at a national level into local government. But how times have changed, because right now, whether it is local government or national, at any point, both issues would be discussed. At different tiers, we're discussing they somehow impact whatever is decided at a national level will impact the outcomes of a local government, and vice versa.
The EFF was called 6%ers that cannot be imposing their policies into the ANC. And moving from 6% in 2014 to 8% in the local government elections, in which they were representing in more than how many 200 municipalities, you know. So their policies, if you look at them now, is the same policies that the ANC has, but they are not implementing. The EFF was merely, or even now, the EFF is appealing with the ANC to say, implement the policies. And the EFF, many will tell you that these are the same policies that they advocated for when they were in the Youth League, and some of them were expelled for echoing those policies.
But if we had to be more granular and say if we move to their discussion document on land and agrarian reform, there are instances there where there would be differences, because Veli, if we had to look at just the state custodianship of land, that has been a contentious one, because the EFF is of the view that equitable access will only come if the state owns the land. And that is something that has caused great discomfort with the ANC if they are to coalesce with the EFF at a national level, because they've held the view that the land needs to go to the people. Just expand on that one, because there is a significant difference when it comes to just state custodianship of land.
Sure, but let's go a little bit back. We will understand that the history tells us that the inequality in terms of the land ownership patterns in this country emanated from the colonial legacy, which brutally used violence to ensure that people had their land taken away from them, and all the minerals that were on top of the land, be it the arable land or under the ground, which are the minerals, were taken away from the people. So there was a battle that informed the struggle of the black liberation against apartheid. Now, if you realize that in 1994, when just before 1994, during CODESA, when negotiations were done, it does appear that there were some compromises that were made, because at the core of the struggle against apartheid was the issue of land. You'll recall that in 1913 Land Act, which cemented the disastrous land inequality patterns that we have in this country. So if you go back there, you need to look there that if in 1994 we could not address the core of the issue of land, then it means that right now billions have been spent by the current government to try and fix that. But it does look like in the program, in the land reform program, something has gone wrong there. And then the EFF is saying, so what is it that is stopping the proper redistribution of land? Perhaps there in section 25, we need an amendment where we say it's an expropriation of land without compensation. But therefore, they are saying, but the land, they must be owned by the state. And then now later on, they try tried to modify their position and said, no, it's not ownership, it's custodianship, so that they will be in charge of redistributing the land to those who are deserving. Now, so that if you no longer need the land can be brought back and given to others. But now you find that there is a high contestation from the NGOs, you find a high contestation even within the ANC was saying, wait a minute, the state ownership of land, the state ownership of land, it's not something that it's not an idea we are warming up to. So it becomes, therefore, we do agree with expropriation of land without compensation, but the implementation is the problem. And you'll recall that has also shaken a lot of institutions, particularly traditional institutions, who felt threatened. I remember that the late king of Amazulu, King Goodwill Zwelithini, said, if we do not own the land as the kings, we are not kings. So in other words, they, as kings, to feel that they have got the power, they needed to own the land. So if the land was going to be owned by the state, or the land was going to be given, the custodianship of land was going to be to the state, it threatened the very traditional institutions which at the beginning of the struggle against the oppression, against the colonial legacy, were the kings. At that time, so you recall the wars of resistance, Sandlwana, you recall the Bambata, you recall the wars that were fought by King Mushweshwe, and as well as King Sekukune and King Insa and many others. So your policies, they somehow shake those traditional institutions. I think that's where the EFF is having a problem right now, because their approach is at loggerheads with many institutions that are strong. Traditional institutions, we'll even recall that AfriForum even partnered with the King of the Zulus because they wanted to resist this ownership of land. So we also have business interests who are saying, how about the private property rights, of which the EFF has been at pains to try and explain how are they going to ensure that the private property rights are going to be respected when we impose the issue of the custodianship of land by the state.
But I would say this discussion document will most certainly be a very interesting one, because even in the document, they're going to concede that 11 years in legislatures, we've attempted to effect at least this aspect of our manifesto where we speak of expropriation of land without compensation, but it has all resulted to naught. Nothing has happened. And as it stands now, we just celebrated the restitution of the Lands Right Act, 30 years of that specific act. And 48 billion later, you've had 80 claims that have been settled, 80,000 claims, pardon me, that have been set, 80%, pardon me, of claims that have been settled. But what has happened here, we've seen that most of the claimants have opted to take the cash compensation, which actually doesn't address the land issue, because you have the very same claimants who will come back to government and still seek land, still seek RDP houses. So what this document states is that even if they have not agreed to our methods of how to address the land issue, the methods that they have now have not worked. 48 billion rands later, nothing has worked, and all that's happening here is that the previous landowners are the ones that have been paid this 48 billion.
Sure. Also, in the 2017 land audit report, if you look at the facts that are there, it says South Africa's land mass was about 122 million hectares, of which about 90% or 95% of that is registered with Deeds Office. And out of that, only 89.5 million hectares of land is owned by the individuals, the companies, the trust. And those who are individual owners of the land, they're also found in the trusts, they're also found in the companies that own the land. So the issue of the minority owning the land, including the state, by the way, which also own a significant portion of land, and that issue has not been addressed currently. How is it that government has not sufficiently addressed the issues of land when they also are they're having the land within their hands, that they are not sufficiently and efficiently distributing to those who need the land? So the EFF, right now, what they need to come up with, how then do we draw partners? Because you need consensus.
You need allies.
You need to reach certain compromises for you to be able to implement.
Unfortunately, gentlemen, a very interesting conversation we're discussing here. The second discussion document on land and agrarian reform, but we unfortunately have run out of time. Thank you very much, gentlemen. These are the SABC's specialist researchers in conversation with me, but that's where we leave it. Oliver, it's back to you in studio.
Namfunda, thank you so much for that. We will continue with the rest of our rolling coverage on the EFF's National People Assembly. In a short while, I'm going to be in conversation with a political analyst, Dr. Levi Ndo. But for now, we're going to take a short break, and on the other side of that, we continue.